Ready to go? Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Tabbins. I'm the Ontario NDP critic for energy and the climate crisis. I'm joined by Ian Arthur, Ontario NDP critic for the environment, and remotely we have Aaron Bearwald, conservation biologist. Ian will give a more fulsome introduction. Doug Ford declared his war on the environment the moment he became premier. And it is Ontarians who are paying the price for a government that is ignoring the climate crisis and costing the people of Ontario hundreds of millions of dollars to not build renewable energy. First, he ripped down the White Pines wind farm project at a cost of $141 million, and now he's scrapping the Nation Rise wind farm. It's bigger, it was further along in its construction, and it's likely to be even more expensive to rip down. Doug Ford needs to come clean about how much his destruction of wind farms is costing the people of Ontario. Even the local Conservative MPP, Jim McDonnell, has said this action would be as bad as the Liberals cancelling the gas plants. And with that, Ian?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Ford's flimsy excuse for tearing down renewable energy infrastructure is that the windmills will impact the local bat populations. There are scientific studies and bat experts that say this is not true, and the government knows it. And the unfortunate thing is when you try to use flimsy scientific evidence in this manner, you undermine the credibility of incredibly important scientific work that is being done all across Canada and the world. I am considering that this is the government that gutted the Endangered Species Act very recently. I am incredibly skeptical that the bats are truly the priority of this minister, and the rationale for cancelling this in his decision portrayed him less like Batman and more like the Joker. With that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Erin Bearwald. She is a conservation biologist at UNBC, specializing in migratory bats, and she would like to comment on the scientific evidence surrounding this. Erin, are you on the line?
I am indeed.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to just go ahead and speak a little bit about your evaluation of the decision?
Absolutely. For me, it was very surprising that bats were cited as a reason to be shutting down this facility. I've been doing this, I've been working on this issue for over 15 years, and we've been trying to find balance all along. We can have bats and wind energy coexist. The industry and the bat biology community has been working very hard towards this. We have lots of scientific studies. We have lots of ways that we can effectively reduce bat fatalities. And in this company, I've critically reviewed all of the work that they did, and they did all the right things. They went above and beyond what the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources requires for bat surveys, and they proactively and voluntarily had agreed to implement some pretty strict mitigation strategies. So shutting turbines off in low wind speeds during autumn migration will reduce fatalities by over 50%. We've known this for 10 years. And they agreed to do that without being asked. Now, it's really important to understand that bats can be an issue at some wind farms. They absolutely can be. And some companies are not proactive and they're not doing the right thing, but this company did. And it's very unfortunate that this company and this site is being penalized for doing the right thing. Some of the comments that the minister made in his letter were that there were areas of significant habitat that were ignored. Well, in fact, those areas were treated as significant by the company, even though there were no bats there. And to me, again, this is a sign of them doing the right thing. We're going to treat this as good habitat, even though there aren't any bats here, in order to try to protect them in the future. And they're being penalized for that. The minister, in his letter, cited concerns for hoary bats, big brown bats, and little brown bats. This was a bit confusing to myself and other bat biologists. Hoary bats are the bat that is most frequently found killed at turbines across North America. So, okay, good job, Minister. Little brown bats are on the Endangered Species Act, and they are species at risk across Canada and Ontario. But so are some other species that he didn't mention, such as the tricolored bat, which has also been impacted by turbines. But then he did talk about the big brown bat, which is completely befuddling to me. It's not a species at risk, and it's not a species that's frequently killed at turbines. So it's like he was grasping at straws and coming up with names that someone gave him. It just didn't make any sense from a scientific perspective to cancel this. We need wind energy in the ground to fight against climate change, which is the biggest threat that bats have now. We need to be working with responsible companies to get responsible energy in the ground. And using bats in this issue is harmful to bats because it reduces the amount of renewable energy that could be built, but also it does really undermine the good work that is being done. If you're spouting misinformed scientific facts, it tells people wrong details. And that's very bad. We should be really having science-based decision-making, and this really was not about the science. There's my rant.
Thanks, Professor Beerwald. Are there any questions for either us or Professor Beerwald?
Can we get into the bat science for a bit? Just maybe you guys or the professor could explain why the expert called to the tribunal, Philippe Thomas, who is a wildlife toxicologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, would testify that the risk to bats was grossly understated, and talked about the dangers that these turbine blades can cause their lungs to explode, all this sort of stuff. This was all at the tribunal hearing. So can you respond to that? Why do you have a different conclusion than this guy with Environment Canada?
Yeah, absolutely, I can respond. Every single development has a risk. And with turbines, it seems to be that the risk is frequently bats. And one of the ways in which bats was killed, I'm going to be very specific here, one of the ways, bats are killed in two ways by turbines. One, they're struck by the blades, and the other one is they encounter a low-pressure system that can damage their lungs. They don't explode. I wrote that paper, so I can very strongly say that. And so those are actual issues. But what the other thing is that's missing here, the nuances here, is that we can reduce or eliminate bat fatalities. We don't need to have turbines or bats. So if we reduce the amount of time that turbines are moving in low wind speeds, so this company has agreed to do turn turbines off from spinning at wind speeds below 5.5 meters per second during migration, so for 2 months during migration, and then on the shoulder seasons also reduce to about 3.5 meters per second. But that's when most bats are killed. And if we do that, we know it reduces fatalities by 50 to 60% across the board for all species. If that is unacceptable, if the desire is to have no bat fatalities, we can work towards that. We can increase the amount of time turbines are shut off at night. We can increase the amount of wind speed that we required the turbines to be shut off. We could have seasonal shutdowns. We could put acoustic deterrents. So lots of people are working and really promising. We have technology now that we can put on the turbines that blast ultrasound, really, really, really loud ultrasound, and it deters the bats from spending time around the blades. So we have and that recent studies shown to reduce hoary bat fatalities by over 80%. We can combine those things. We can combine ultrasonic deterrents with low wind speed shutdowns, and if all of that is not enough, we can do seasonal shutdowns, a very specific timing when the bats are actually there. So we have lots of very proven solutions that would reduce or eliminate bat fatalities. And they can coexist, and this is important. We have the tools.
Thank you, Erin. Just on that as well, I will loop back to the climate crisis being the single biggest threat to species across the planet. There's over 1 million species that are at risk and in danger of becoming extinct because of the climate crisis already. And when you have, we need clean energy, and we can work with any clean energy company to figure out ways to mitigate the risks to species at risk around those projects.
Are there other questions? Mike?
Another question for Beerwald, is it?
Beerwald.
Yeah.
Mike Crawley from CBC here. When you were just speaking there, you kept saying we can do this and we can do that. Do you work for Nation Rise, or do you get any funding from them?
No. No, I don't work for Nation Rise. The closest I've been to EDPR is I did a postdoc with an environmental NGO, the American Wind and Wildlife Institute, a few years ago. And it is a cooperative organization that is funded and ran by a mix of wind energy companies and environmental NGOs. So on the board right now is the head of the National Audubon. There's also the Nation Conservancy, Defenders of Wildlife, and then there is a whole suite of wind energy developers. So when I say we, I mean we as the scientific community, and we as people who need to be working with wind energy companies. We can't test, for example, we can't test mitigation strategies unless we get access to sites, unless we have buy-in from the companies. So I really don't know EDPR very well at all, and I've had no relation at all with the Nation Rise wind farm. For me, this was just I felt a need to speak out that bats were being used as a pawn here. The science just didn't support it. And I have this, I guess, fear of this being a Chicken Little sort of scenario, that bats are going to being used as this tool to shut down wind farms or being stated as an issue when they're not. But then when they really are an issue somewhere, because this does happen, there are sites where bats are an issue. If that does happen, I really don't want this bat conservation fatigue sort of to set in or just have the science not believed at that point. So it's important to speak out when it is an issue, and when if it's not an issue, it's also important to set the record straight.
Peter,
Is that clear?
What do you think the real issue is? I mean, the government was pretty clear with White Pines. This is not a willing host community. That's why we're taking this down, even at an advanced stage. So what's the deal here?
I think it goes back to the statement that was made by Premier Ford that if he could, he'd rip down every wind turbine in Ontario. And I think he and his team see an opportunity to stop another wind farm. Construction isn't done yet, and that's what he's doing. There is no logical reason to do this. It's going to cost us a lot of money. As Dr. Beerwald has said, there is no reason in terms of protecting species to do this. It relates back entirely to a premier who doesn't think we need to act on the climate crisis, hates renewable energy, and is engaged in a war on the environment.
It was approved just days before the writs were issued for the election. Was that irresponsible? Should the government be approving a contentious project like this right before it goes to the polls? It might be wiser to wait till a new government's in place.
But in fact, if you look at the record, it had gone through all its hoops in terms of approval. You could also ask, so should we not approve a process? Should we not approve a project that's already shown that it meets all our criteria? Should we be making a political decision to not have renewable energy? I think in this case, they were just following the normal process for approvals.
So what do you think we're into for cost? What's your best guess on estimate on what it's costing to rip down the wind turbines so far?
The companies spent or committed somewhere in the range of $200 million. They will probably have costs for damages from contractors. They will have costs related to profits that they will have to forego. So based on what I've heard so far and having talked to a few people in the energy industry, a minimum of around $200 million, but probably substantially more than that. So if you look at the Ford record so far, $231 million for White Pines and cancellation of a number of other renewable energy projects. You add on another $200 million plus. We're starting to get in the range of $500 million. I was around when the Conservatives really went to town on the Liberals for the gas plant cancellation. This is exactly the same kind of thing.
Is it though? I mean, the motivation is different here. I mean, the gas plants were widely considered canceled because Dalton McGuinty was trying to win the election and not lose those seats. Are you saying it's the same thing, or is this an ideological difference on how we're going to have energy in this province?
I see the argument you're making. This is politically driven. In the case of Dalton McGuinty, as best we can tell, it was driven by a very short-term political consideration. Again, rather than basing a decision on the needs of the province or protecting the public purse, this is being driven by an ideology. They're both political scandals. They may have elements that are different, but in the end, they're not making decisions about energy based on what we need and what should be done. but based on what satisfies them, not the people of Ontario.
The company has taken this to court. They filed the paperwork. What? Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a hypothetical, but if they get, if the court is able to, like, is there a path in which the court rules and this gets stopped? And is it the type of thing where it would set a precedent for the broader kind of threat to these projects?
I'm sorry, Alistair. Could you rephrase that question? There were so many parts.
Well, I mean, it's basically like they're going to court. What could they possibly achieve? Like,
Well,
how do you see that playing out?
From what I've read, the court may be able to set aside the decision of the Minister of the Environment, and if that's the case, then they can continue their construction. The difficulty that the wind farm company will have is that they have to have completion within a few months, and if they don't, then they are in jeopardy of losing their contract with the Government of Ontario. So there's a potential for the company to be successful in the short run and still be put in a position where they have to sue us for their losses. Potential is there for them to win and possibly get this built in time to fulfill their contractual obligations. I hope that they're successful in court, and I hope they're able to go forward and build. But we are at risk here of being on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars, which we should not in any way, shape, or form be on the hook for. This should not be happening.
I guess the second part to that is there a precedent to it, or would that be essentially just a claim of damages, a breach of contract or whatever else?
Well, I can't talk about much longer history. I haven't seen, in the time I've been at Queen's Park, a government abusing Ministry of the Environment approvals to stop a project that it was politically opposed to. I think that this government has been setting a number of precedents of bad practice where politics have trumped environmental considerations or financial considerations.
Can I?
If you want to throw in.
I think that you also have to consider what the future implications are for investment in Ontario when you have multiple companies who at this point have had deals fall through, have had deals reversed. When we look at trying to attract these businesses to Ontario, renewable energy is booming all over the world, except in Ontario now. And this is massive amounts of investment that we are missing out of. There are jobs associated with this. This project alone, 230 people were laid off just before Christmas because of this renewal this approval being revoked.
I'm sure somebody already asked this, but there has been a lot of pushback from communities that don't want wind turbines in their midst. What do you say to that? And is there any justification for what they're saying and the government saying that that's why we're doing this, or one of the reasons we're doing this?
A few things here. One, I think that all of these sightings could have been handled better by the previous Liberal government. They should have made it clear from the very beginning that there would be substantial investment in the local communities. There should have been more work to build support. But I'll note now that there are quite a few people in this community who had leased their land who are now being deprived of that revenue. So there is a group that actually in the community supports this project going ahead, just as there was at White Pines. Very angry people confronting their MPP, Todd Smith, who killed off that development. These communities have both supporters and opponents of electrical development or generation development. We're always going to have some cases where there will be conflict. The best we can do is try to make sure that the project is environmentally sound, protects the health and safety of the people who live in the area, and go forward with what we need, and that's clean energy to deal with a crisis that is ramping up on a daily basis.
I have a wind farm in my riding. The Wolf Island Wind Farm is one of the largest ones, or was one of the largest ones at the time it was built. And it faced some opposition in the community, and there's a few that continue to oppose it. But years into this project, it's simply part of the landscape. And there's many people on Wolf Island who benefit from it. The company worked with the islanders to do a few things. Initially, when they set them up, all the lights on the top of them blinked at the same time. which people on the island find incredibly hard. And so they made an adjustment. Now they're intermittent, or they change when they go, so it's not a big flash of red light all at one time. So you have companies that want to work with the communities that they're going into. They want to figure out a way forward where there are community benefits, where the landholders who hold them do receive benefits, and there's a good way to do this. And I agree with Peter. I don't think we saw the good way being done previously, or they possibly, the contentious way that they were forced onto communities was not good. But work with those communities, figure out a way forward. There are far more benefits than negative effects from these.
And what about the costs of wind energy? I mean, it used to be quite high, and now it's going down and predicted to, what, 4 cents?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because in fact this project, the price for power is coming in around the 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's substantially cheaper than previous wind installations, and cheaper than nuclear from Darlington in the next year or so. So in fact it would have been a low-cost source of energy in this province.
Guys, is there not just a level of hypocrisy to canceling these projects from a government that prides itself on cutting desk lines and trimming around the edges to try to, beat the deficit? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, have they got their eye on the wrong sorts of things, and are they wasting money?
They're completely wasting money. I mean, all the talk we hear about with lack of funds to look after kids who have autism, lack of funds to invest in our schools, and they're quite willing to risk $200 million plus in charges on this cancellation. They're going up towards $500 million in total cost on cancellation of renewable energy projects. I think when they talk about waste and deficits, they're talking about things they don't like, and they're quite happy to blow the bank when it comes to things that they're ideologically committed to. There is no consistency with them on this.
You're saying it's odd that this government would spend $200 million on to save some bats?
It's totally out of character. It's totally out of character. Did you want to speak to that, Ian?
No, that's fine.
Do you think that there are more, are there a bunch of these farms that have been constructed that you're kind of waiting for the letters to arrive to? Do you see this as part of, is there more to come?
I can't say that. It's certainly a fear that I had when this one came forward. We were quite shocked when they canceled White Pines, which was already well under construction. To go after this one that's also well underway says that throwing money away just is not an object for them, is not a concern. And so clearly you have to worry about whether they will go after other projects and whether they will cancel already existing contracts, already existing wind farms. Given this kind of behavior, that risk has to be recognized.
This project is significantly larger than White Pines was, and it's further along. So when you're thinking about the potential liabilities and the costs going forward, you have to factor that into it.
You good?
Yeah.
Just that $200 million figure, is that just a guesstimate, or did the company,
$200 million
said that?
figure?
The likely cost of canceling it. Is that,
Well,
does that come from somewhere?
when we've talked to the developer, they say that it's in that range. When I've talked to people in the industry, they say that's sort of your basement, with the potential for it to be much higher. I gather that's the cost that they've already spent or have contractual obligations for, but it doesn't include loss of future profits or potential damages from lawsuits by subcontractors. So we could be talking a lot more, but 200 million is a range. It's not a bad base.
And as you point out, in this case, the government can't point to the value of the amount of money they're going to save on subsidizing the electricity. The way they point to that 790 when they talk about the 231 million.
No, this is outside that calculation.
And this is also 7 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So it's in the range of
It's cheaper
prices
than
we pay
gas.
already. Right.
Gas plants bottom out at about 8 cents, so this is cheaper than gas plants.
And why is it so much lower than the other projects?
Because the technologies move forward. Computers get cheaper, so does wind technology.
You look at some of the contracts in Canada's Midwest at this point, and you have contracts at 3.7 cents per kilowatt hour for wind. So the costs keep diminishing. They scale up. Their manufacturing processes are improving. The technology has improved itself. It's just, and it's going to keep going down. Same with solar.
I believe that though the Ford government would argue that the previous Liberal government, the costs were so high, and that we haven't realized those lower costs.
Well,
under the
this was an
contracts.
opportunity to do that. This project came in at around 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So everything they've said about, well, we would support wind if it was cheaper, well, it's cheaper. And still they're canceling it.
We bought in high and we're selling low.
Great business model.
Pretty good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Aaron, if you're still on the line. That's fine. There may be two so far.